Camille the PowerPoint? Did you give him the PowerPoint? I'll sit down. Just don't worry. Mucho gusto. From INTA or from?
Ministerio de Salud.
Ah, so we'll talk today. Hi, Juliana.
How are you?
I haven't seen you before.
Yeah, how are you?
Good,
Yeah,
good.
good to see you.
Good. I asked about you, and I was surprised I hadn't seen you.
Told him you were our grandmother.
They haven't invited me to anything they have done. That's the thing.
You're working
Complaining.
now.
No, I'm not.
You're working intervention in the schools.
Yeah, in schools, right. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I read all about your sweet beverage thing, huh? But
Buenos días.
there's
Buenos
some-
días. Vamos, en honor al tiempo, voy a comenzar presentando al invitado. Nos hemos reído porque lo voy a hacer en español y él no habla español, entonces dijimos que podía decir lo que quisiera, pero en verdad lo que quisiera decir tiene relación con el INTA. Yo creo que el invitado que tenemos hoy es un invitado que refleja un poco la reflexión que hemos estado haciendo de dónde queremos que esté el INTA. El profesor Barry Popkin es probablemente uno de los epidemiólogos nutricionales más importantes que existe en el mundo hoy y refleja la excelencia que siempre hemos dicho que debe tener un académico. Tiene más de 500 publicaciones, más de 50.000 citaciones. Refleja la transdisciplinariedad, porque es un economista de formación de base, pero que sin embargo trabaja en nutrición. Refleja esta idea de la innovación, que los académicos miramos el futuro y no respondemos al presente. Él creó el concepto de la transición nutricional y hoy día está impulsando esta idea de que debemos trabajar en los ambientes alimentarios y evaluarlos. Y finalmente tiene esta conexión con la comunidad, que nos hace tan parte de la Universidad de Chile a los académicos, que lo que nosotros investigamos debiera tener un correlato en políticas públicas, en la toma de decisiones, y él efectivamente dedica parte de su investigación a hacer translational research y aplicar esta investigación. De hecho, probablemente lo podamos tener un minuto cortito en relación a preguntas, porque de ahí vamos a correr, porque la ministra de Salud nos está esperando. El motivo de la visita del doctor Barry Popkin es tratar de montar un proyecto que permite evaluar la ley de etiquetado que ha impulsado el Ministerio de Salud, algo que también hemos discutido largamente acá. Así que en verdad solo podemos agradecer su presencia y que disfrutemos la presentación que viene.
Can everybody hear me? I don't speak Spanish. Excuse me. Talk to you briefly of the
beginning. Then really what's changed because so fast, which is in the food system and the package, the active units are changing very, very rapidly. In America, try to begin to address these changes in the food system, in our diet, activity, and how different places in the world are starting to try to pull back and prevent weight gain and create health. Easy, and this one problem we face for many decades. Really part of what's happening is our biology. We have survived with a very survival of nutrients. We also discovered, because we know it and get it, that we are the food intake, and we understand that for a long time. That the creation of the wheel, refrigerators, and all the different convenience at home, tractors, buses, cars, all the modern conveniences, elevators, what have you, that we've cut back and we've wanted to cut back on. And modern technology has flashed. We get from agua, we've moved to all the sugary beverages, be it coffee with lots of sugar if you're from Brazil or Mexico, and we've changed the technology that's changing so fast that's bringing us these new foods, these new ways of eating, new eating habits. As well as the technology has created a new energy balance, a new diet, which is transforming very rapidly the Americas. The Americas began the transformation earlier than has happened in Asia and Africa, but essentially the whole globe is moving very rapidly in the wrong direction in terms of the diet and activity and energy balance, and we really have to deal with it. To begin with, to understand, there's several things that have gone on. You remember a time, many of you will, when what we faced, when Fernando Monkberg started this institute, it was undernutrition. It was stunting, it was malnutrition. That was our life. Ricardo and I began that way, thinking and focusing on that. But very quickly, starting in the 70s and 80s, but certainly by the 90s, the Americas began to change in activity and diet. And certainly in the last decade, in 15 years, we've had a major increase in overweight and obesity in all age groups in the Americas, particularly the Andean nations, from Mexico down to Chile. All the countries, 50 to 70% of the adults overweight and obese, diabetes rates that are skyrocketing, many, many diet-related problems and body composition related. And just in the last 1 or 2 decades, for the same age group, and we've gained so much extra kilograms. But what's very interesting, our waists are going up for the same BMI, and I'll show you that for one country, but it's really for many countries where we have the data. We find our waist circumferences are increasing at the same BMI. So our body distribution is changing in very adverse ways. So our visceral fat is going up, relatively speaking, and creating greater health risks for us. And it's much more complex for young children, the changes in how they go on, and I won't really address that, but overweight in Chile now and the Andean nations in all age groups is going up, as we know. So these are the kind of changes at the top 5 percentile. in many countries where we have data like Mexico, Bolivia, for the Americas, and some other countries across the globe, at age 30 and 40, everybody between in the last 10 to 15 years, the BMI and at the top centiles, the distribution is shifting way over to the right. So if you think of the BMI distribution like it may have been 20 years ago, where there may have been 10, 20% overweight and obese, and you think of today where there are 50 to 80% overweight, depending on the age, gender group, in adults in this country, you think of the large change in the top percentile. Now in a country like Chile, if we had 2 national surveys like we have in Mexico, I would imagine the top 5% have BMIs of 38, 45. And that's what we now have in Mexico. If we move on, but I'm not going there. I just wanted to give you an idea. But the most important issue, both Mexican Americans, to give you an idea, people with some Indian blood in them, but essentially mainly looking just like Chileans in many ways. You have some Mapuche blood, they have various mixtures and admixtures. The body, the waist circumference, 6-7 centimeter growth for the exact same age and BMI over this period here of really, it's actually the 2012, I'm sorry, that's incorrect on the slide. So over 10 years or so, we've seen that kind of a waist circumference increase. And it's in the UK the same way, the United Kingdom, the same in China, it's the same in every country we've had waist circumference data and BMI data for nationally representative surveys. We've shown the same kind of change. So the overweight, it's not just the overweight, it's the waist going up at the same time that makes it particularly difficult, dangerous health situation for our countries. From a diet side, we're aware. We're certainly aware here of, you are now, as I showed Camila from sales data, per capita wise, you're the #1 purchaser in the world of sugar sweetened beverages. You've been going up very rapidly. Now the US and Mexico are below you. In Mexico because the tax started a year ago, and in the US because we started to have a cultural shift on sugary beverages. Animal foods, you know how much you consume. We know that the refined carbohydrates in the diet, be it from potatoes or from breads or other things, is very high here. And we know that people are increasingly consuming more processed foods. And we also understand the snacking is going up. We understand people are eating more away from home here. We understand lots of changes going on in our diet. And the good things in our diet are going away across the globe. And it's no different here. The shift from whole grains to refined grains, the increases in sugar consumption, the increases in fried foods and so forth, it's very, very serious. And we have to move backward. Now, one of the issues is physical activity. Clearly, part of the problem with the increases in overweight and obesity is the decline in physical activity. We've had a vast change, and I'll give you an example from the US where the change really has been slower, and then I'll show you a country that we've been and modernized much later than Chile to give you an idea of the extreme. But the declines are changed, and we use a measure that gets at metabolic equivalence, but it's a kind of an indirect measure of energy expenditure minus sleep. So in the US, by 1965, using time use and occupational data, we kind of have a trend for occupation has really gone down. If you notice over here, these are the occupation activity units for the average American adult and nationally representative. This is for home production, and this is for travel, and then for active leisure. At the same time, television, computer inactivity has gone up to 40, 43 hours a day. So these is kind of the changes in my country. Now, China, this is where we were in 1965. China started in 1991. Every 2 years, we asked for each occupation. Did they stand? Did they sit? What they lifted? And we did it for home production. We did it for leisure. And each of these declines in market occupation, in home production, child care, cleaning, washing, cooking, and in travel, were each linked with at least a doubling of the rate of overwork, following people longitudinally over time. And the fact is that this is the kind of decline. It may have happened a little earlier in Chile. China really didn't modernize until they changed to a capitalist system. They were very, very labor-intensive, old-fashioned farming before they moved and opened up the economy. So it's later. You probably had the changes like in the U.S. in the 60s and 70s that you started really modernizing farming and other things. But the point is, our occupational shift in service sector with computers, with cell phones, people don't even get up and move. They text each other now instead of talking. So the changes that go on in activity are a big cause of a lot of our problems. But we can't go back. We can't get rid of the tractor. We aren't going to get rid of the subway. We're not going to get rid of the computer or the cell phone. So the problem is, and we're not going to have farmers plow by hand with a carabao or an oxen or some kind of a work animal. So we have to deal with the food system. Diet is a lot easier to change than is activity. Essentially, if you drink a Coke, it's essentially the same thing as walking more than a half mile or running that, depending on your speed, or a mile. So that we really need to deal with diet to deal much with this problem. And it's our diet that we're really dealing with. Now, the diet transformation is very new in our world. We don't really fully understand the impact of modern processed food. The supermarkets only have been something that happened with packaged processed food really since World War II. Before that, supermarkets and grocery stores served real food. They were just an extra easier way to sell frozen vegetables or other things, but we didn't process them. We didn't create all these new convenience foods. Coca-Cola was not consumed across the globe, very little. The same with not only soft drinks, but fruit juices and the millions of things that are made in the beverage side, and the same thing for all the processed, refined products that we get in the stores today, the junk foods and so on. So that really this supermarket development was very, very early. And in Latin America in particular, and I'll just going through to give you a little idea, the big chains really are very new. Carrefour and Walmart, the two biggest in the globe, really didn't start until the last 50, 60 years. They're new. So this whole development with these large supermarkets, these large chains of convenience stores, all is very new in the world. And in the Americas, in 1990, a very tiny amount of food was sold in supermarkets and convenience stores. Most of the food at that point across all the Americas came from farmers markets and such, and little free markets that you find all over cities and villages and so forth. But it changed just in a decade in all of Latin America. Chile higher than this, Mexico higher, some of the Andean nations lower. But this is from very careful studies, country by country. 60% of all the pesos in Central America and South America came from supermarkets. Huge change in just a decade. And it's accelerated in the last decade. I don't know what it is for Chile today, but I would guess it's probably 80, 85% of all the food comes out of these stores today. And more of it is barcoded, processed, packaged food. It's no longer simple. just going in and buying fruits and vegetables and beans or rice and in a very unprocessed way like it used to be. But at the same time, agriculture changed. It used to be farmers and governments worked together, and then there were little mills, and it was a very simple system. But today, we're very concerned with our modern food system. We're very concerned that with our basic crops, that's the mentality. We started it in World War II. Then we were concerned with cash crops and meat. Our whole food system across the globe is designed around sugar, oils, grain, corn, wheat, and the different grains, feeding animals or feeding humans with that, instead of thinking about, and so the prices across the globe of these products have gone way down, and we've ignored other parts of the diet, the essential whole grains, the fruits, vegetables, the other parts. So pricing-wise, over the last 50 to 60 years, the price of the unhealthy parts of our diet, sugar, vegetable oils, red meats, and so forth, red meat is good in moderation, but not too much, and have gone way down. The same with the sausages and so forth. But in prime, the real cost, relatively speaking, of the healthier components of our diet have gone up. And our food system has changed. We started with basic science in the 1800s. In the 1800s, Mendelian genetics. In the 1800s, we figured out nitrogen with we did all sorts of things that created the basis. Right before World War II, we started creating technology, but very few were using it. Even in the U.S., most farming was still very primitive. It wasn't with reapers and big tractors and things. It was after World War II, with, in my country, in current terms, trillions of dollars spent to modernize our agricultural system, to build railroads and highways right to take the farm food to the livestock areas or to take it other areas. The whole development of the system. It happened in Europe the same way, and we pushed that system on the world. Educated agricultural universities across the world, and this was the mentality. And the mentality was the goal was to create cheap grain, cheap salt, oil, other kinds of things, sugar, and we did it. But we neglected produce. At that point, nutrition thought protein was the critical thing. Animal protein was a huge thing. Ricardo's professors we had protein advisory groups. We thought protein was the critical thing we needed in animal protein in our diet. And the funny thing is that I will ignore that part. The funny thing is that we had this modern food system, and the government had a huge role in it. The governments across the globe were being funded and financed from the U.S., from the World Bank, from the Latin American Development Bank, from across the globe. They were pushing this whole system. That system changed and changed our world. We really created the revolution. We created irrigation. We created across the globe. Modern grape production, as you know it today, is very different than it was long before. And it was controlled by government, but it's transformed. And today, the controlling processes across the globe are really not government. They're retailers that buy directly from farmers. They're Nestle's and Cokes and Pepsi's and others that buy directly from farmers. They're fast food companies that work directly with farmers to create their poultry, their beef, their whatever. So the powers, and then there are these huge global agribusinesses that buy oil and other things and trade them across the globe. And these have changed the whole power of the system so that we can't have a government just change farming a little and a little. They don't have the power they used to have. It's really decentralized into these other groups. So we need to then come in to the system in other ways. And the way we're working to change the food system today is we love to go back and restructure it so that it's cheaper to buy fruits and vegetables and beans, grains and whole grains, and more expensive to buy the less healthy food, but it's not going to work that way. And it's going to be very hard. So we go with things to deal with the food system by dealing with the retailers and what we purchase and changing prices and changing marketing and dealing in other ways. And that's kind of what puts us where we are. This is the global price of beef in real terms from the International Food Policy Research Institute. In the 1970s, in dollar terms, to buy 100 kilos of beef was about this in global terms, and it went down like that. That's the kind of shift that we created, and this is in contrast vegetables in my country versus and sugary beverages and fats and oils and sugars. Look how little they went up versus fruits and vegetables and other healthy products if I put them in there. That's what's going on in every country. And so our food system has changed. We used to consume mainly some minimally processed food with maybe it was frozen, maybe it was fermented, maybe it was processed a little bit or dried. But now we've shifted over to very highly processed things. If you were Carlos Montero or some others, you'd call this very ultra-processed. But more and more of our diet is in these sugary beverages, in all these highly processed kinds of food. And if you go to a supermarket and you look around in the shelf space, you'll see an increasing proportion goes here. People still buy, some people cook, they still buy ingredients that aren't so processed, but there's more preservatives, there are more chemicals, there's lots of ingredients. And the sugar in the U.S. food supply, looking at the ingredients list and the 200,000 unique foods we have in 1 year, or the 1.2 million different barcoded foods we've had over the last 12 years, we found 70% of our food has some kind of added sugar in it. You will be surprised how much is here. We don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's not so different. So we've changed the ingredients in our foods in ways you can't imagine. And that's kind of part of this revolution we're talking about. Here's my country. We've gone down in our calories, particularly from beverages. We've really, because we just through a cultural change of being aware more and more about sugary beverages, there have been some reduction. More in the educated. Unfortunately, not among the poor and the less educated. The people that read and learn are the ones who have the money, not the poor. But they've gone down in the very highly processed sugary beverages, and they've gone, but they haven't changed so much in the food. In general, that's kind of the big change. The other change that's very interesting, this is what we call ready to eat, and then this is ready to heat. That means something that you just buy that's prepared and packaged like a frozen pizza, and then you cook it or heat it at home. So my country doesn't cook anymore. I do, but I'm educated and I know that I should buy real food and eat it and I'll be healthier. But the reality is the changes going on in my country are going on globally. When I study the same thing in Asia or Mexico, and I'll show you Mexico in a second. So the food retail sector changes are amazing, and we have to understand. And they've been enabled because we have these World Trade Organization that services and technology can cross borders with no problem. So the retail companies can come into Chile, the food companies can come in, the fast food companies can come in. It's all kind of part of the global trade agreements that countries across the globe have made. But that's cool. The marketing, when I started and looked back at 1900, there weren't very many snacks in the world. People they had maybe some coffee or some tea. They didn't even have much sugar in it. It's completely changed today. Snacking across the globe, in my country, 3 snacks a day. 0 in 1900 from documentation. China, when I came there, they had no snacks. As the food system developed between 2000, 2002, 4, 6, and 11, every year a tripling of snacking from nothing at the beginning of that decade. As the food industry came in and started marketing, be active and drink a Coke all the time. Be active and eat this bar or this bag of chips or what have you. So the reality is marketing has changed what we eat in ways that are very profound. And we've allowed it through the whole food system. And that's part of what we need to understand. I'm trying to give the underlying basis. The changes going on in how we're eating are very complex and very systematic. And there are a lot of forces that have really changed how we eat and move. And to go back, we can't go back how we move. It's going to be very hard. We tried bicicletas. We try to get people to do things. And we're going to have some more movement. We need it for health. But it's really the diet that we have to deal with. And these kind of changes that have come across the globe, the way we eat and what has come with it is really amazing to the modern diet of any country in the Americas. And we are very overweight. We have huge increases in diabetes. Canada down to Chile, it is really the scourge of obesity, diet-related diseases of all sorts, obesity-related problems are really changing. And we understand that. So in Mexico, we wanted to understand how much processed food did they eat? How much barcoded bags and boxes and cans? So we asked for every person, for each of the, from a nationally representative diet survey, well, we asked them how much for each item. We asked to look and see if it had a barcode. It was a box of packed processed food. And we found essentially in Mexico City, you're probably higher than this because you're much higher income and more modern than Mexico City even, for sure. And your other urban areas are certainly more modern. This was overall for the whole country, almost 60% of the calories in 2012 were from packaged processed food. Imagine what it is in Chile, a higher income, more modernized country than Mexico. So in Mexico, some of it was tortillas, and a lot of it was all sorts of really highly processed desserts, not so different than all your grain-based breads and sweet breads that you consume here, and other food. Some was healthy food, but parts of it were certainly not very healthy. So it's different there. But the point is it's changing. In China, we did the exact same thing. I'm not going to go on, but I want to show you in China, it's very low when we did the same survey in 2011. But we're going back this year. And China's growing at 50% a year, the retail sector. I bet it's up there in Mexico already. It's just the growth in countries that don't have it is very much more rapid. Because every year the speed of change goes up. If you think of the speed of change at Coca-Cola, in the 1900s and 1930s, very little any place in the globe. It took them really 60 to 70 years to be in every city in the world. But Red Bull took 4 years from starting in Austria to being found at every gas station, every convenience store in the globe. Just think of the speed of change today of food systems and think of the differences. So I'm going to just skip over to away from that. Now I want to just remind us of food service. This is China. I didn't put on this slide here Chile, but Chile has a very high intake now from restaurants, from away from home eating. And that's another, we haven't started yet to figure out really how to deal with the portion sizes in restaurants, how to deal with the amount of salt they put in the food, how to deal with the frying that goes on, all the components, or the excessive amounts of refined carbohydrates they're giving us and sugars. But the reality is that this is a second sector, along with the retail food, and these two components comprise more and more of our diet. So what do we do about that? What's going on? We don't even know, actually, but we think we can create healthy packaged processed food. We think we could get whole grains and food with with less sugar and less sodium that would be healthy. They have the chemistry to do it, and they can do it. We don't really know. We're hoping, because we don't think, we'd like to go back to buying real food and get rid of processed and packaged food. We'd like to go back to drinking water, tea, and coffee, maybe a little sugar, a little milk or something in the coffee, but not the excessive amount that comes when you drink the red part of this. And that's a very serious issue. We need, but we can't, we're not going to do it. People are used to going to grocery stores. People are buying packaged processed food. So that's why we're using things like marketing controls and front of the label profiling to try to push the industry to create healthier food. Ricardo involved in one system that they were unable to get here, which would have labeled even whole grains as what we really want and so forth, but it didn't work, and we've now got the red light kind of too much sugar, too much salt system coming in. But we need to deal with the food system. We're not going to get everybody to go to the market or to just go on the outside of the supermarket and buy dairy and buy vegetables and fruit and kind of other food that just doesn't come packaged and processed. It's just not going to happen. So we've different tools. The economic side of me have things to deal with prices, which is really these two are really only viable. We know from experiences we really can't change trade very much, because the World Trade Organization, when you try to tax trade, you're being unfair, and they take you to court and they stop in some countries. We know labeling to make it very clear if a food is unhealthy or healthy will help. We don't know how much, because we really haven't. We've evaluated the changes in a couple countries. We've evaluated in the Netherlands, and labeling does change reformulation. Industry makes healthier food. They want to not have that logo. I know that in Chile. We'll start to get marketing a lot more, reduced sugar, reduced sodium, reduced saturated fat products, so they don't have the big red sign on them. We know marketing. We know they've sold us on a way of eating. We know that they market an excessive amount of the food marketing is for unhealthy products. We know a lot of it's oriented toward children, but not all, and we need to deal with it. And so we understand these things. We understand with the retail sector. Haven't worked half as much with the restaurant fast food sector or really been able to tackle the farm system. We've tried, very difficult, very strong lobbies, very strong organizations, but I've certainly tried with lots of different meetings, but it's been hard. But we are beginning. Mexico, we're involved with the National Institute of Public Health there in evaluating. We put in a 10% tax on sugary beverages in Mexico, similar to the change in Chile where the soft drinks are now 8% more taxed than other beverages. So a little bit different, a little bit less here. And then we put in a junk food tax also in Mexico. Very important. So the sugary beverage tax, we haven't published our paper. It's under review right now. But essentially we published a short summary on a web that showed that each month in the first 12 months of the tax, the reduction of soft drinks, sugar-sweetened beverages went up. By the end of 12 months, it was much higher. For the lowest third of the population, they reduced by 17% the soft drink consumption. The group with the highest incidence in Mexico of obesity and diabetes, untreated diabetes. So it was very important. They increased their water consumption, water purchases. Mexico doesn't have as much potable water as Chile. They buy water. They increased it significantly. My colleague here is Lindsay Smith, is involved in evaluating the junk food tax. They're roughly the same kind of changes, shifting from junk food to healthier food. So we know we can do it. We don't know yet what's happening in Chile, the effect of the tax. We don't know in Barbados, that just introduced one. Nobody's evaluated in France the impact of the tax. but these countries have all started taxing soft drinks. Other countries are doing things on food systems and other things that I'll talk about. But the front of the label profiling, either positive or negative like we have here, we don't yet know the full impact on purchases. We know it affects industry. We know they change the products. We also know the positive logos or negative logos can help. But how much we don't know, and I'm not going to go on very much because I think I'm at the time point. Am I correct? 15 more minutes. Okay. All right. So we have in Latin America these very confusing. If you look at the bottom of your packaged goods, there's something called the GDA. These little boxes with percentages of 4 things. We did a Mexico. You've done some research here. In Mexico, even nutrition students, dietetics with masters, couldn't understand the GDA. But we understood them. They used the guidelines for sugar from 20 years ago. I think it was like 98 grams of sugar with 100%, and so every food had low percentage of sugar. So, based on such a high guideline, whereas what we really want is 20 grams or, we want 10% of our calories or 5% of our calories, depending whether the US or the UK, we have different pushes for different amounts of sugar in our diet, but we want really to cut the added sugar. And so we have countries doing the logo. We have, along with your country, all of these countries will have instituted by the end of the year the beginning of their logo. We've been meeting for 2 years. It's happened. They're doing positive logos. Ecuador and Chile are doing the red light, based on food, on certain nutrient cutoff. These logos are based on food categories, which we find to really be the healthiest. So we encourage healthier food within every category of items. We have image banning already in Ecuador, starting here for children's images. We certainly have some countries in Mexico with the plan that we had worked out to put in a positive logo, also was banning all claims on everything. So there would only be the positive logo and nothing else plus the product name on the front of the package. Unfortunately, a new conservative government came in, a minister of health came in with a relationship with the food industry of a very serious sort, and that didn't get implemented, although it had been already approved and passed. So it's waiting. But we know that, like Chile is doing, linking labeling with marketing is best. Cutting the noise from the food industry about the unhealthy marketing of food is the first step to opening it up for us to be able to do more. Unfortunately, one of the complexities that we'll talk about later is when you focus on one age group, we're going to probably see the marketing shifting to programs that affect the parents but talk about the kids' food, and the kids often watch. But maybe you have 20% of your population children under 14. The law says if less than 20% watch the TV show, then you can market whatever you want. So the reality is we'll see the advertisements shifting from the children's shows to the other shows, still hitting the children. There'll be maybe 15% watching soaps and sports events and so on. So I don't know if we won't know, but it's the beginning. And we have to evaluate it, which we will, to understand how good it is and also to understand if we can improve it. Because part of this process is we're learning. This is the first country in the Americas with this kind of a ban. We need to know what it does and what its impact is, and if we can improve it or if it's good enough. We just don't know. And so these are the kind of things. Brazil was held up on a marketing law. They created a marketing law, really comprehensive, much more comprehensive than the Chilean one. But the Attorney General stopped it. We don't know what happened to do it, so it's still under legal kind of control. Peru has a law that hasn't been implemented, similar. Industry self-regulation we know doesn't work. It's irrelevant, but it's something they try every place. Other countries have put much more limited marketing controls in. The only countries that have done it really well are the Scandinavian countries, and they've kept obesity down. They don't have it. They've done all sorts of things, but we're talking about an American South. Okay, what did I do? Voila. Okay. All right. So I mentioned that I'm worried about the research because in Mexico we found that we have some controls in Mexico, very minimal on children's TV, but we found the children in Mexico watch only about a third of their TV, the children under 10 are children's shows, but a third of soaps and a third of sporting events and other stuff. So I don't know what it will turn to look like here. But we just don't know if it'll be enough. But we have to learn. When we come to the school environment, that's where many countries across the globe are trying to get rid of junk food, are trying to get rid of soft drinks, push water and healthy food, and it is a kind of I would say, the most successful global effort, but it's just a little piece of the pie. Very few countries ban children from bringing unhealthy food into the schools, so that often there's substitutions like that, and it's only part of the diet, and we don't know its impact, to be honest, yet. It hasn't really been evaluated. I'll talk about the most comprehensive in Chile in Brazil in a few seconds. Mexico, they did it by just reducing the milk allowed, plus banning soft drinks for school age and middle school. So it's very similar to what Chile is doing. Brazil was very interesting. They required 30% of the food came from local small farms, and that a total of 70% must be real food that is purchased locally or nationally, but real food that then they cook. So it was not processed pizza brought into the schools or processed tortillas or empanadas or whatever. And then for another part of the food system, you have all these vendors. Singapore put the vendors in the center. They couldn't just kind of wander the streets. They had to be in areas so they could control sanitation, they could control the kind of fats, and they could try to start educating them to create lower fat, lower sodium, lower added sugar kind of food. Very interesting. And the farm side is very minimal. We're really not doing much on farming. Create healthy, cheaper, healthy food. The away from home side, the fast food, the food stalls other than Singapore, and the restaurants, we have hardly in the globe done anything about it. We have tests here and there, but we haven't created any regulations in any country yet, other than calorie labeling, which is going in my country and some other countries for chains and other things. And that's starting, but that's just not enough. And portion controls, many other things are going to happen, but it's really, no countries have started dealing with that yet. And then we go around to thinking about, just kind of to summarize, really you're one of the leaders. What you're doing on marketing and on front of the label profiling and being able to evaluate that is really one of the leaders in the globe, certainly in the Americas. And you have a sugary beverage tax like Mexico. It's a little bit smaller, you're a little higher income. We don't expect the same effect because you're higher income and it's a smaller tax, but we hope it will work. And along with the bans on marketing that will come over time, we hope to see an additional impact. But the marketing bans don't start till July of next year, 2016. So we really, 16. Yeah. So there's lots to go on. We do know taxes work, though. We do know taxes will affect. That's about the only thing that we've been able to evaluate so far. We haven't published on that. It's coming out soon. But we know that from tobacco, from alcohol, from other areas works. And we know that the marketing controls and the warnings work for tobacco. So we're essentially taking in Chile what they did in tobacco and transferring it into food. And that's really the best examples we have. Although we have to have healthy food as well as unhealthy food, it's very much more complex and it's a much bigger sector to fight. It's the same issue. And so that's kind of where I end. And Camila, tell me how. Juliana?
The article that came out in the New York Times on Monday.
Okay, so the issue is that the food companies, particularly the beverage companies, are doing what if you remember, as countries across the globe fought the tobacco sector, the tobacco companies started buying researchers, and they put out literature for 25 years. There were studies coming out saying tobacco doesn't affect your health. It doesn't affect your lungs. It doesn't create heart disease. It doesn't create lung cancer. There was that kind of research. So today we have Coca-Cola, which historically, and Pepsi have done similar kind of things. The soft drink industry and the food industry have been funding researchers across the globe to do some of the same kind of things. It kind of puts doubt into the public. It confuses the issues. It makes it harder for the public health scientists who care and are trying to have integrity to be heard. And it's part of what confusing the public is all about. And therefore the senators and congressmen say, hey, what's the truth? I see this from this scientist and this from that scientist. Well, there was an article this Monday. Coca-Cola actually, in the New York Times, Coca-Cola actually is going to spend $10 billion over the next decade marketing soft drinks in low and middle income countries. $1 billion of that is going to go for marketing research about, and a big hunk for buying academics and groups, eminent groups that are trying to give money to do different kind of research. To say activity is the problem is one of the things that they're doing. So this one group called the International Energy Balance Group, very eminent Americans have taken 1 to 2 million already. Actually, they've already given out 10 million to that group, but it wasn't in the New York Times. They couldn't document all the figures. And on top of that, they funded some studies across the world, cross-sectional studies with children, a little activity data, a little diet data, and then saying activity is associated and is the cause of the obesity. Now, I don't disagree that if we did longitudinal studies, like we've done in China, activity is a big cause. But they're trying to imply, and all that they're trying to do is that diet doesn't matter. We need activity. Be active and you can drink all the Coke you want. That's really their message, and that's what Juliana's talking about. And Coke is funding this group. Now, you used to do it in little ways. Now they're putting big money trying to create a global group to do that. Luckily, scholars across the Americas and mainly across Asia have said no. We know it's funded by Coke. We're not joining. And very few scholars outside of the U.S. and some European have really joined what they're trying to do. But the reality is they've already done one study that they gave a group called the Pennington Lab. And they're doing this whole effort is very systematic to do a lot of things using some very good, eminent scholars, people that I respect, but they believe activity is the cause, but they're doing other things that they're being funded to do. They also were funded, which the Times article didn't talk about, and they wrote a series of papers with very funny methods to say diet data is horrible. They've done that also. So they're trying to disqualify diet. Both, we don't know how to measure it, so everything we're saying is wrong. And secondly, activity is everything. And activity is important. We all know it. But that's really the gist of this, the set of articles the New York Times, The Guardian, others have come out with. Right over here.
Hi, my name is Erin Hamilton. I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you're proposing to evaluate the front of label packaging here.
Well, we have three ways to do that. First, through the leadership of Camila and Marcela, we have an arrangement with a national broadcasting group to get tapings of all the shows that we ask for, along with the audience that watches them, so that we can understand what people are seeing and what they're seeing on logos and so on. Now, that's not the market, that's the marketing part. For the labeling, Camila has gone in already once and taken a picture all around each packaged good of what's on them. We'll do that each year for the next 4 years, so that we'll see if the labels go on and if those red logos go on. That's one step. The second step is they have a cohort of 12-year-olds that they started from age 4, that they've been collecting diet and activity. We'll add some questions about knowledge and activity and related to media and some of these issues to that, and we'll do the same with the 4-year-old cohort. We'll start to look at the diet changes. Thirdly, we have a database that gives us scanned food purchases for a nationally representative sample, where they scan every day everything they purchase, and that scanning only gives us the barcode, the SKU, and with it some things about the manufacturer and the product and so on. But we can link it to Camila's data on front of the label profiling, and we have with it the amount of purchases for each of these households. We know their age, income, gender, and their socioeconomic status and where they're from, so that we can look at how the logo changes purchases. So we, on the one hand, are going to monitor the logo and its implementation, and we'll know the nutrition data for each of these packages. So we'll know the sugar, we'll know the fat, we'll know the sodium, and the calories, and we'll know if they're putting the logo on properly or not. We'll see the logo on it, and we'll see the purchase changes. And we'll then look at diet shifts independently. That's the most we can expect. I think purchases and logo changes are probably the most likely. The diet changes will take longer. We will look at them. We hope there will be some on 4 or 5-year-olds, and they'll keep growing older, but we'll follow the same cohort. So it's a combination of different things: measuring the front of the label profile, linking it to food purchases, understanding how food purchases change for households with children of different ages, with other households, low-income households, and so forth, to see where the impact is. All right, then the second part, by each year taking a picture of the nutrition facts panel and the ingredients, we will be able to study reformulation. And we would expect, let's say, some products that have too much sugar or too much sodium or too much fat, they will go down in that and they'll be reformulated, like we've seen in other countries, and we'll capture that. So that's part of that, taking the pictures and linking it with the purchases. So yes, thank you, very good question. Yeah. I think that the process you're talking about is happening in different ways in different countries. Part of it is what they call science is going more toward basic science, new drugs, new technologies, all of that, genetics, metabolomics, and so forth. But in Mexico, we do have a CONACYT like we have here that does funding, but it's not huge. So we need international funding for our Mexico survey from our National Institute of Health and from other foundations. And those tend to have to be international usually. And the same thing will happen here. Part of the money might come from CONACYT, a little bit, but it won't be a lot. And then it will have to come from, like, the Canadian International Development Research Center has a request for proposals just to do things like we're talking about. Plus, and it's not so huge, but then there's other potential from foundations and from our National Institute of Health once we can put enough proof together to show we have a good enough study with the right kind of data. But it is difficult. Clearly, countries are expected at the income Chile to have more resources going to these kind of things. But it is expensive and it's going against industry, so you're right. More and more money goes to promote things that create the economy, understandable in the sense of politics and the pressures for all of that. And the food industry has its powers, and it's a very complex issue. And so we need things like foundations that care, like the Bloomberg Foundation, philanthropies, and others that have helped in Mexico. Robert Wood Johnson helped in Mexico. Foundations that care about public health around the globe have to be brought in to help, because we're not going to get it in any country in the lower middle income world enough money. And that's the reality, and anything that relates to the food industry like this, and actually anything that relates to public health, will not be funded any place really as well as it's needed in terms of the burden of disease and the burden of problems. It's kind of a reality of the way the world of science has gone.
Minister. So we thank you very much, and hopefully we will do more and more, so we will be able to also show our own progress in all this.